comment turkeys who are driving privatisation in New South Wales, who give the Treasurer Roosendale the big tick. Why? Oh, because he's putting plenty of stuff out there into the private sector, and that's inherently more economically stable. Ask the people of California what deregulated private sector ownership of the electricity industry means. It means skyrocketing power bills and blackouts on a fairly regular basis. The second big argument that they'll put forward is, oh, look, we can't afford the $15 billion we need to invest in the new part of the electricity industry to bring it up to date and to keep it going. Well, that's a funny number, $15 billion that we can't afford. What they don't tell you is, in the same breath that they said that, they also committed each and every one of us to paying off a bill for $16.4 billion for new wires and poles. And actually, it's a really bad investment. We've been ripped off really badly. But we can afford $16.4 billion for wires and poles, but not $15 billion to invest in the transmission and generation side of the industry. Makes no sense. It's a complete myth. But leave that aside for 1 second. Let's not worry about that too much. I actually agree with them. We can't afford to spend $15 billion on new coal-fired power stations, because if we do, we will increase our greenhouse gas emissions in the electricity sector by 50%. That's another 30 million tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions from New South Wales. We will blow our budget, we will blow the climate, and we will blow our economy. It would be a crazy thing to do. So we're privatising in order to build more coal-fired power stations and to pump out more greenhouse gas emissions. So how do you figure that? Very straightforward. We're going to have clean coal. So you don't have to worry, we're going to have clean coal. Small problem, folks. Clean coal doesn't exist. It's a sort of twinkle in somebody's eye. It's like the perpetual motion machine or the cold fusion machine. It might work or it might not. In fact, I would like to bet that it won't work. But you're all going to be forced to bet, we're all going to be forced to bet that it will work. Because if it doesn't work, we're going to end up with $15 billion worth of coal-fired power stations that don't work, we can't run, and all hell will break loose. The final argument they use is, oh, this is a way of cutting costs to reduce power bills. Oh yeah, sure, they'll cut costs. They'll cut costs by cutting services. The way they'll cut services is they'll sack everybody in the call centres in the retail sector and push the jobs off to overseas call centres who will have no idea what you're talking about and no sympathy for the consumer. I want to, at this point, pay tribute to the call centre workers around New South Wales who are actually taking industrial action against this, who are, if you call up your electricity supplier, they'll tell you all about electricity privatisation and what it means for you. There's obviously going to be a stoush over this, but all power to their phone arms that they are actually standing up and saying no to Rees and to Roosendale and to Tripodi. The reality is that actually we need to do a lot more than all of this. We need a new vision for our electricity industry. We can't go on with our coal-fired generators. We can't go on pumping 57 million tonnes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year. We have to seriously reinvest in phasing out coal, in improving energy efficiency, and in taking into the equation the demand side, making customers part of the partnership in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing electricity bills. And if we privatise, if we hand over our power stations for 25 years to the private sector, and if we hand over our retailers forever to foreign multinational corporations, you can be absolutely guaranteed that there will be no progress towards that sort of industry. New South Wales will become the carbon dioxide equivalent of a rust belt. Be locked into a high-polluting, energy-intensive future, and we will be shut out of the new economy. We will be shut out of the economy that relates to the new green jobs. The 73,800 new green jobs that we could create in New South Wales, high-quality, heavily unionised jobs that we could be creating in New South Wales, will be squandered because the corporate owners of the new power industry will not let us go there. It's a jobs disaster, it's a climate disaster. So the question I really want to pose here is, why is it that there's so much effort put into privatisation? Why? What's really going on here? I want to give you this thought. I think the reality is that the success of public education, the success of TAFE colleges, The success of the ABC in standing up to 10 years of Howard's bullying. The success of public health and transport, despite appalling political planning for provision. Their continued success at delivering quality outcomes. The success of public schools despite 2 decades of slander and 2 decades of chronic underfunding. The success of public electricity in keeping the lights on and keeping the bills down. Those successes are an inherent embarrassment to those who believe that the way forward is competition, privatisation and markets. The very success contradicts their philosophy. They cannot afford to live with that contradiction, so the simple answer is vandalise that which we do collectively for the common good. Vandalise it so that it doesn't deliver those successes, so you can get away with the idea that it all ought to go into the private sector. These are challenging times. Our very first task is to defeat privatisation. We're going to introduce, when Parliament sits again in September, and I take it as an article of faith that Parliament will sit again in September, we're going to introduce our No Mandate, No Privatisation Bill, which will mean that every politician will have a chance to say to the electorate, by their vote, yes, I think that privatisation is a way forward, or no, I think it's a bad way. That means that come March 2011, every politician has to front up to the electorate and say to them, yes, I stood up for your rights. I stood up for your rights of public ownership. I stood up for your rights of quality, public sector provision. I stood up for your rights for the income that public ownership brings into the economy. Or they have to say, no, I swallowed hook, line and sinker the nonsense that comes out of Macquarie Bank, Macquarie University and Macquarie Street, and I fell for the line on privatisation. But it's much bigger than just stopping privatisation. What we need in New South Wales and Australia is a new vision for public provision. Not just pushing public provision into new corners of the economy, not just expanding existing services, and both of those are very important, but a new vision, a new leadership for public provision that really takes to the limit those things that the public sector does best. The capacity to look after those who can't look after themselves. The capacity to deliver bucket loads of social justice to the economy. The capacity to take risks and innovate. The capacity to provide a standard of employment that puts the private sector to shame. But mostly the capacity to take forward those things which we as a community want to do collectively for the common good. Thank you very much indeed.